The biggest myth in economics is that the poor fail because they make bad choices. The reality is they make bad choices because the system makes good choices impossible. That is the core argument of Poor Economics by Abhijit Banerjee, which we are decoding today on Nonfiction Insights.
I have to say, starting off by saying the system makes good choices impossible is a pretty bold claim. It sounds a bit like uh, removing personal agency from the equation completely. The standard meritocracy mindset is that discipline and good decision-making are exactly what separate success from failure.
I mean, that is the story we all default to. But if you look at the actual data, you see that the poor are actually functioning like expert hedge fund managers. They're making incredibly complex financial decisions every single day just to survive.
Hedge fund managers, come on, that seems like a massive stretch.
Only in terms of the complexity of the math they are doing in their heads. The difference is that a hedge fund manager has billions in liquidity. A massive team of analysts is a huge safety net. The poor have zero liquidity and absolutely zero margin for error. The argument here is that poverty is not a character flaw. It is a systems engineering failure.
Look, calling it a systems engineering failure sounds like we are talking about a broken computer server, not human beings making daily choices. If I spend my money on something stupid instead of feeding my family, that is on me. You cannot just engineer that kind of human behavior away.
Agency absolutely matters, but you have to look at the context of that agency. Let me try to frame this differently. For a wealthy person, or even for you and me, a bad decision is just an annoyance. If you get a parking ticket, you pay it. If you forget to transfer money to your savings account, you just do it next month.
Sure, I see that. It stings, but it does not completely ruin my life.
Exactly. But for the poor, that exact same minor mistake or even just a stroke of bad luck like a cow getting sick or a brief drought hitting a harvest is a complete system crash. It wipes out literally years of progress. The thesis we are exploring is that the poor live in a world with no slack. Because there is no slack, the cost of every single decision is astronomically high. They are walking a tightrope without a net, while we are just walking on a wide, paved sidewalk.
I can appreciate the tightrope analogy, but I really want to push back on this idea of a design failure. Are we just using fancy terminology to say they simply do not have money? We see people climb out of poverty. It happens all the time. So is it really a systemic impossibility, or is it just incredibly difficult?
It is mathematically suppressed by what the authors call the S-curve. This is the mental model that anchors the entire first half of the book, and it explains why effort does not always equal progress.
Okay, walk me through how this S-curve actually works.
Imagine a standard graph where you plot your income today against your expected income tomorrow. For most of us in the middle class or above, that line goes up at a nice, steady 45-degree angle. Money makes money. Interest compounds. Your effort yields a proportional return. But for the poor, this curve has a trap built into it. The line actually looks like a giant letter S. At the very bottom of that curve, the line is completely flat.
Flat meaning they are putting in the work but seeing zero financial growth.
Worse than zero growth. Flat means your effort actually decays. Let us look at a specific example from the source material. Imagine a guy who lives in a rural village and buys shorts from a wholesaler to sell in his local market. He buys a pair for 50 cents and sells it for 70 cents. He makes 20 cents profit. But he has almost no capital, so he can only afford to buy 5 pairs at a time. He spends his entire day selling them in the heat, makes a single dollar of profit, and then has to spend that entire dollar on food just to survive the night.
So he is just breaking even, running on a treadmill.
He is running on a treadmill. But here is the glitch in the system. Let us say he gets sick and cannot work for 3 days. He has to eat his own capital just to buy rice while he recovers. When he gets better, he has no inventory and no money to buy new inventory. He has to borrow money at a predatory interest rate just to get back to zero. He's working incredibly hard, but the return on his investment is literally lower than his depreciation. If you are a manual laborer, your body is your capital. If you do not have enough calories to maintain your physical strength, working harder actually depletes your body faster than your low wages can replenish it. You are biologically running a deficit. That is the flat part of the S-curve.
That is a genuinely terrifying image. You are basically pedaling a bicycle up a hill that is too steep, and if you stop pedaling for even a second, you do not just stay in place, you actively roll backward down the hill.
Precisely. And to get over that steep hill, to reach the inflection point where the curve goes up and your effort finally starts compounding, you need what they call escape velocity. You need a big push of capital to get past the flat zone. But the invisible infrastructure of poverty is designed to strip that capital away from you before you can ever accumulate it.
Let us talk about that invisible infrastructure, because I think this is where the confusion really lies for people who believe in strict meritocracy. If the game is mathematically rigged, how do we explain the baffling choices people make when they are in that trap?
Give me an example of what you mean by a baffling choice.
The book talks about Aucha Umbarb, a man living in Morocco. This specific story always bothers me when we talk about systemic failure. He is living in deep poverty. He explicitly tells researchers he does not have enough food for his family, but then they find out he saved up his money to buy a television and a DVD player.
Yes, the famous TV paradox.
It is incredibly frustrating to read. I get the systemic S-curve issues, but if your kids are hungry and you buy a television, that is a failure of personal prioritization. You cannot defend that as a system glitch. Why on earth would you buy a TV when you are actively malnourished?
It is very hard to defend if you're looking at it from our comfortable vantage point. But the authors explain this through a concept called rational hopelessness.
Rational hopelessness sounds like an oxymoron. How is starving your family for entertainment a rational economic decision?
Let us do the math on his situation. You're stuck at the bottom of that flat S-curve. To get to the next meaningful level of life, say, buying a sturdy roof or agricultural equipment that would actually increase your yield, you might need to save $500.
Yeah.
But with your current margins, you can only realistically save about 10 cents a week.
So doing the basic math there, it would take him decades to save that up.
He would literally die of old age before he saved enough to buy the equipment. The goal of escape velocity is mathematically impossible. So you are holding this 10 cents. What do you do with it? Do you stare at a blank wall and be miserable for 40 years, meticulously saving for a future that will never arrive? Or do you buy a cup of sugary tea or a cheap television and make your miserable present slightly more bearable?
So because the big, life-changing goal is entirely out of reach, they just cash out for the small, immediate joy.
It is extreme temporal discounting. If the future offers a guaranteed 0% return on your sacrifice, then maximizing your utility in the present moment is actually the most rational economic move you can make. The television is not a mistake. It's an anesthetic.
That is incredibly bleak. You are saying the mindset is, I know I am permanently stuck, so I might as well be distracted.
It goes much deeper than just hopelessness, though. It is deeply physiological. And this is where the idea of a bandwidth problem comes in. There was a landmark study done with sugarcane farmers that perfectly illustrates how poverty destroys cognitive processing power. Sugarcane farmers harvest their crops once a year. This means they're relatively rich immediately after the harvest, and they're incredibly poor right before the next harvest.
I remember reading about this. It acts as a perfect natural experiment because you are testing the exact same people with the exact same education and the exact same moral values, just with completely different bank balances.
Exactly. The researchers tested the farmers' fluid intelligence and cognitive control before the harvest when they were starving, and again after the harvest when they had money. The result was staggering. Simply being in that state of pre-harvest scarcity dropped their cognitive function by the equivalent of 13 to 14 IQ points.
13 points is massive. That is the statistical difference between average intelligence and being borderline cognitively impaired, or basically the brain fog you get after pulling an all-nighter.
Poverty literally consumes the processor speed of your brain. You are spending 100% of your cognitive bandwidth calculating impossible trade-offs. If I buy milk, I cannot buy medicine. But if I do not buy medicine, I cannot work tomorrow. With that program running in the background constantly, you have absolutely zero bandwidth left over for long-term planning or discipline.
So when we look at someone buying a TV instead of calories, we're not looking at a lack of moral character. We are looking at a human brain that is running at maximum CPU usage, just trying to survive the afternoon.
We strip the poor of all their resources. We force them to make 100 times more decisions than we do with 1/10 of the cognitive bandwidth. And then when they inevitably make a suboptimal choice, we blame them for decision fatigue.
Which brings up a really crucial realization for me about this whole idea of invisible infrastructure. As you are explaining this bandwidth tax, I'm realizing how few survival decisions I actually make in a day.
This is what the authors call the piped life. Think about your morning routine today. Did you have to run a chemical analysis on your tap water before you drank it to make sure you would not contract cholera?
No, I just turned on the faucet. I did not even look at the water before I drank it.
Did you have to sit down and mathematically calculate exactly how much of today's income to set aside to avoid starving in retirement? Or did you have to manually hedge your daily health risks?
No, my retirement contribution is automatically deducted by my employer before I even see the paycheck. And my health insurance is just a plastic card in my wallet. It is all automated.
That is the invisible infrastructure. We live in a highly paternalistic environment that constantly nudges us toward health and wealth without us having to dedicate a single brain cell to it. The rich do not have to be disciplined about water quality because cities' civil engineers handle that for them. We do not have to be hyper-disciplined about saving because the financial system defaults us into it.
And the poor are living completely outside of that automated environment.
They have to manually opt into survival every single morning. They have to actively gather and boil their water. They have to physically hide their cash in a wall so they do not spend it or have it stolen. They have to memorize their children's vaccination schedules because there is no pediatrician's office sending them a text message reminder.
That completely flips the meritocracy argument on its head. You are essentially saying that I am not actually more disciplined than a person living in a slum. I just have vastly better default settings.
If you took away all your invisible infrastructure tomorrow, if you had to personally purify your own water, secure your own physical cash, and negotiate your own medical care every time you got a fever, all while operating on a severe caloric deficit, you would crash the system too.
So this fundamentally changes how we approach solutions. If we cannot fix their environmentally suppressed IQ, and the operating system itself is broken, how do we fix the user experience? Usually the default answer is we just need to educate them.
Let us look at agricultural fertilizer as a perfect case study for this user experience gap. The math on fertilizer is completely undeniable. If a farmer uses it, their crop yield goes up drastically. The return on investment is something like 70%. Any Wall Street trader would commit crimes to get a guaranteed 70% annualized return.
And presumably, the farmers know this. They have been farming their whole lives. So if they know it works and they know it makes them money, where is the glitch that stops them from using it?
It is a timing mismatch. Think about the economic cycle of a harvest. Farmers have cash in their hands immediately after they sell their crops. They feel relatively wealthy in that moment, but they do not need to buy fertilizer right then. They need the fertilizer months later when planting season begins.
So the obvious answer is they should just save the harvest money until planting season.
But remember the lack of infrastructure. They do not have a secure savings account with an app on their phone. Keeping physical cash hidden in a rural home is incredibly risky. Family members will ask for emergency loans, roofs will leak, someone will get sick. By the time planting season finally rolls around, that cash has slowly evaporated into daily survival needs.
The liquidity is just completely gone by the time the demand for the product actually arrives.
Exactly. So the engineering fix was not to send in consultants to lecture them on the benefits of soil nitrogen. The fix was a program called ASI. They simply sent salespeople to offer fertilizer vouchers immediately after the harvest, when the farmers actually had the cash in their hands.
Oh, that is a brilliant UX fix. You let them lock in the commitment while they have the liquidity.
It is basic behavioral economics applied to poverty. The farmers bought the vouchers when they felt rich, and the physical fertilizer was delivered months later, right when they needed to plant. Adoption rates absolutely skyrocketed. It was never an education problem. It was a friction problem in the interface between their liquidity and the product.
It is basically treating poverty alleviation like app design. You want to reduce the number of clicks a user has to make to get to the desired outcome.
Precisely. We have to view them as completely rational actors who are navigating an incredibly irrational, high-friction system. And this exact same logic applies to the huge debate over mosquito nets. For years, 8 organizations argued about whether they should give anti-malaria nets away for free or charge a tiny subsidized fee, like 75 cents.
The traditional economic argument there is that price acts as a signal of value. If you give something away for free, people will just use it as a fishing net or a wedding veil because they have no skin in the game.
The researchers absolutely destroyed that assumption with hard data. They found that when you charge even a completely trivial amount, like 75 cents, demand for the nets plummeted to almost zero. But when they removed the fee and made them free, demand went through the roof. And more importantly, people used them correctly to prevent malaria, regardless of whether they paid for them or not.
So the 75-cent price tag was not acting as a value signal at all.
The price was a wall. It was a massive friction point. Paying 75 cents required finding the physical coins, justifying the trade-off against a meal, and walking to a specific distribution center. It was a bug in the user experience. If you want people to not die of malaria, you have to make the correct choice nearly automatic. You just give them the net. You artificially mimic the invisible infrastructure that wealthy people enjoy.
I have to pivot to microfinance here. Because for the last 20 years, microfinance has been presented as the ultimate solution. You give a poor woman a tiny loan, she buys a cow or a sewing machine, and she becomes an entrepreneur. Does that not solve the S-curve capital problem directly?
It creates a great narrative, but the authors strongly deconstruct what they call the entrepreneurship illusion. We have this romanticized Western idea that the world's poor are all natural-born entrepreneurs just waiting for a microloan to unleash their potential.
Are they not? We see so many small businesses in developing nations.
They are what the book calls reluctant entrepreneurs. They are only running these tiny businesses because the formal labor market has completely failed them. Think about it realistically. Does a woman in a rural village actually want the massive stress of running a volatile startup, selling hair clips, or tending a single goat with absolutely zero safety net?
When you put it that way, probably not. She probably just wants the same stability that anyone else wants.
She wants a boring, stable job. She wants to be a factory worker or a government clerk with a predictable weekly paycheck. Microfinance is a survival tool. A small loan lets her buy one sheep, which creates a job that keeps her head barely above water. But these microbusinesses rarely scale past the flat part of the S-curve.
Because you cannot scale a single sheep operation into an agricultural empire if you do not have paved roads, electricity, or access to larger commercial markets.
Right. Microfinance creates a job, but it rarely creates escape velocity. They do not want the extreme risk of a startup, but the system forces them into it.
So if microfinance is not the magic bullet we thought it was, and simply lecturing people does not work because of the cognitive bandwidth tax, what is the actual practical insight here? How do we build this infrastructure?
It requires a massive shift in mindset from being prophets to being plumbers.
Prophets to plumbers. Explain that framework.
A prophet is someone who approaches poverty with a grand, sweeping, ideological theory. They yell, "The problem is Western capitalism," or "The problem is corrupt local culture." A plumber looks at the exact same situation and says, "The pipe is leaking right here at this specific joint, and we need to engineer a patch for it."
And I assume the wrench the plumber uses is the randomized control trial.
Exactly. RCTs are the core methodology of this entire book. The authors argue we need to treat economic policy exactly the same way we treat clinical drug trials. You do not just guess if a new cancer drug works based on a grand theory. You run a double-blind trial.
Wow.
We need to A/B test reality. Do not debate if chlorine dispensers at water stations work. Install them and measure the hardware.
I read about one of those trials involving lentils that seemed almost absurd at first glance.
The immunization study.
Yeah.
They were trying to solve terrible vaccination rates in rural clinics. Instead of running expensive awareness campaigns, they just started handing out a $2 bag of raw lentils to any parent who brought their child in for a shot.
And offering a simple bag of groceries actually moved the needle on medical compliance.
It multiplied the immunization rate by 6. It was an engineering masterpiece. It completely neutralized the friction of taking a day off work to walk to the clinic. It converted a vague, invisible future benefit disease prevention into an immediate, tangible, present benefit dinner. That is a plumber fixing a leak in human psychology.
This completely reframes how I view foreign aid. There is always this loud political argument that sending aid is just charity that creates a cycle of dependency. We always hear the proverb about teaching a man to fish instead of giving him a fish.
If someone is drowning at the bottom of the S-curve, handing them a fishing rod is useless. In this framework, aid is not charity designed to sustain a bare minimum standard of life. Aid is fuel.
Fuel for the escape velocity you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Think back to that bicycle struggling up the steep hill. Below the inflection point, you are mathematically rolling backward. Aid, whether that is a direct cash transfer, a free mosquito net, or a subsidized fertilizer voucher, is the external mechanical force required to push that individual past the crest of the S-curve. Once they cross that inflection point, gravity finally starts working for them. Their own efforts finally start to compound.
So you are not creating long-term dependency at all. You are just temporarily overcoming a physical threshold that is literally mathematically impossible for them to cross on their own. Once they are over the hill, they can pedal themselves.
Precisely. I want you to synthesize this for a second. Based on everything we just discussed about cognitive bandwidth, default settings, and the S-curve, how would you summarize your own financial discipline now?
Honestly, it forces a massive ego check. If I look at my life through this lens, if I had to manually purify my water every morning, calculate my own pension risk on a daily basis, and try to hedge against every minor infection without the safety net of insurance, all while operating on a severe caloric deficit, I would absolutely crash the system. I would be the guy buying the television just to numb the stress. I am not highly disciplined. I am just highly automated.
That is the exact paradigm shift the authors want you to have. The solution to global poverty is not preaching morality or discipline to people who are already working harder in a single day than we will work in a month. The solution is doing the tedious, unglamorous plumbing required to build invisible infrastructure for the bottom billion.
It is entirely about engineering the environment, not debating ideology.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Poverty is an operating system with zero margin for error. We have to stop looking for character flaws in the poor and start debugging the user experience of their economy. Which leaves you, the listener, with a final, slightly uncomfortable question to mull over today.
Let us hear it.
Ask yourself, how many of your own brilliant, successful life choices were actually just default settings that you never even had to think about?
That is going to keep me up tonight.
If you want more deep dives like this that challenge how you see the world, subscribe to the channel.
This is Nonfiction Insights.